Everyone, welcome back to this. I'm your host, Shauna Griffiths. And today I am excited to have our second episode in a three-part series where we are breaking down revenue growth. Today's episode actually is all about how decision makers actually think. So we are here today again. It's all about how do we help you take your game to the next level. And so that's the part that I've infused into the show as we're coming off of a bit of a hiatus. This time around, we're infusing the leadership athlete platform and mindset. And again, we're also breaking down those hot topics that are designed to help you take your game to the next level. I'm pretty excited about this particular topic because it taps into what I do as a part of the changeforce management consulting firm. And I'm bringing in today's guest, Bob Wiesner, who is my all-star changeforce teammate. So Bob, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's delightful to be here as always, Shauna. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I know we had our first episode, and that was a lot of fun, all about how, winning and growing are not the same thing. So, folks, if you missed that episode, you'll have to go back and check that out. But I am also excited because Bob is a first draft class leadership athlete. He is even wearing his t-shirt in this episode if you're watching the video. Bob, one of the things that I've just loved about our work together is the ability to really count on you as a teammate where we're delivering for our clients those solutions that help them to get through these critical junctures. As you and I talk about it, it's all about this like friction and inflection. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about like how did you get to this point where you have the ability to work with clients, as we do, and in your role as principal at Changeforce, that helps us again to really solve things for our clients at these moments.
It's an interesting question, and it's something that I've been kind of gravitating towards without realizing what I was doing for many, many years. And it's only in the last 10 or 15 years that it's really become quite clear that this is actually sort of a calling. Some people love to go into opportunities, go into situations that are smooth sailing. And what they love to do is they love to participate in a healthy organization, in a healthy process. I get much more satisfaction out of solving problems, working in organizations that are not quite that healthy. Recently with Changeforce, we kind of defined that with, we think, very appropriate terminology. We talk about organizations or teams, sometimes individuals, that might be at points of friction or sometimes inflection points.
Yeah.
Meaning friction points meaning those times when things have been operating smoothly, but now it's stuck.
Mhm.
It could be a market setback. It could be a bunch of new business losses. It could be talent retention problems. It could be profit or market pressures. But the firm, the leadership of the firm is now feeling like we got to get past this because this is a major problem for us. That's the kind of stuff I love to put my skills towards, put my perspective towards, and help them solve. The other type of critical juncture is called an inflection point. Now, this would be traditionally seen in a healthier organization. Perhaps it's grown to a certain point, and now it wants to grow more. Or it's been successful in a certain market, and now it wants to be successful in an additional market. These are decisions that leadership has to make. And if they make the right decision, they'll do very, very well. And if they make the not right decision or the less right decision, they could plateau, they could stagnate, they could decline. So in both cases, points of friction and points of inflection, I love to get myself in there with them, figure it out, and help them find the right solution, and then get out of the way and let them do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny that you were saying, I love how you said that in the beginning. Like, that's actually where you like to work in that space, which is contrary to some people who want to work in a place that's like a well oiled machine. And I similarly have not been in organizations that are just humming along as well organized, well oiled machines. It's always that point of, again, either that friction or the inflection. And so many times when I think back to it, I thought, gosh, I really wish that the organization that I was a part of, actually worked with an outside counsel to get just for that coaching and like what do I do in this moment, because as we covered in the previous episode, so many times people just try to sell the hell out of it to get out, to get through whatever that moment is. And that's so much where we talked about winning, and growing are not the same things. And also when you said that this is something that you kind of almost, happened upon over the course of your career, I'll pause for the audience. And if you did miss the first episode, I have, about 20 years of experience in this space. Bob has over 30 years of experience. You have helped, your clients to billions of dollars of new contracts, and your impressive win rate that you have helped them to, by following your methods, of over 80% is pretty remarkable. So folks, we do bring a lot of experience to the table when we're working with our clients, and it really is a strategic way of solving for these moments that we were just talking about.
It is, and it's so wonderful to be in a field where you see the results.
Hmm.
Much like athletics, either you
Yeah.
won or you're lost. So much of consulting and training has effects that might not be seen for years. You might go in, leave them a 3-ring binder,
Yeah.
and then leave and hope that something better is going to happen. But when
Yeah.
you're working with people on the problems that they're facing right now, especially around revenue growth, and you're able to guide them to win more often,
Hmm.
and to do that strategically so that it's not just a short-term transaction that you're able to close, but it feeds the health of the organization. Those outcomes you see in real time,
Yeah.
and you can chalk up the W's that way, and it feels really great to be part
Yeah.
of that.
It does. It does. It's so funny when you said that about like, kind of a three-ring binder. I mean, a lot of times when I know we would talk with clients, like, we're not going to give you a binder. We're not going to give you a 60-page deck that sits on your shelf. Again, what you're talking about is those like actionable processes and new ways of working, that really does show that immediate result. Um, and that's part of what we're going to get into right now, which is really helping our audience to be set up for success, better set up for success, in the work that in the work that they're doing, to drive revenue for their organization. And so the topic here today, it really is helping people to think about how the decision makers truly think. So what's your kind of cliff notes about that to set the stage?
Well, let's set some context for it
Yeah.
first. Um, People that are in business development in sales put a lot of their focus on how they should talk about what they do, what they sell. Let's think of it in terms of pronouns. A lot of focus on us, a lot of focus on we, right?
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to decision makers, and we have to define what we mean by this. We're talking about people who have choices. They are looking at competitors, and chances are that choice is going to be very high stakes for them. It's going to make it might be career making or career ending who they choose. Their the focus that these competitors should have should be much less on what we say about ourselves and much more on what are the decision makers really thinking about? How do we connect with them? What matters to them? When I saw over the years how little emphasis is given to that part of the business development process, that part of proposals, websites, pitches, marketing content, it was stunning. The misalignment between our interest in talking about ourselves versus our what should be our bigger concern, which is what do decision makers really think. So the practice that you and I are now engaged in with Changeforce is really about helping our clients shift their own mindset from and not 100% away from how we talk about ourselves, but much more about what do those guys making the decision really need to hear.
It's so true. And so, again, for folks who are listening, when we're talking about this, I'll give you an example. It's like if you're going into pitch, even if you're responding to an RFP, which we'll get into a little bit in more detail later, even if you're asked, tell us about you, what we're saying is the way you open that conversation up is not saying, hi, I'm Shauna Griffiths, and this is all about me and my services. And again, if you think about it, people actually like to either talk about themselves or hear someone talking about them. So if you can switch that positioning and talk about them first, well, if you're there, how are you there to bring value to them and solutions to them? And again, it's making it more centric around the person you're pitching to rather than let me just sit here and talk about myself to them, because that's when they turn their ears off a bit.
Yeah, so we all know that people want others to talk about not about the other person. They want you to talk about me. It's
Yeah.
that old joke of, well, I've talked about myself for a long time, so enough about myself. Shauna, let to hear you talk about yourself for a minute. First, tell me, what do you think of my T-shirt? In every instance, what's happening is that decision maker is just doesn't really want to hear you talk about yourself. They want to hear you talk about the decision maker or the
Yeah.
decision maker's problem or the decision maker's opportunity. Um, we are so happy talking about ourselves. We can talk
Mhm.
about ourselves for hours and hours and hours, and we're proud of what we've done. We're excited about what we can do. But what people fail to realize in competitive new business pursuits, and I know we'll talk more about this, is that to the decision makers, once they've established an array of options, so once they've picked 5 firms or 15 firms or 25 firms that are potential providers for them, they know much of what they need to know about those firms. We've got this thing called the interweb, and you can Google things, you can find them out, you can use LinkedIn. I mean, they know much of what they need to know. They may have
Right.
some questions, but they're not unfamiliar with you. So for you to go in there and talk about yourself, it's going to be, at best, it might be redundant because you're just covering ground they already know. At worst, it might be commoditizing yourself because you're just going to sound like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
What you think distinguishes yourself from somebody, oh, we have offices in 5 cities and we've got 25 professionals in this area of our firm, or here's our case studies, or here's our growth trend over the last 5 years. I mean, it's just like it's the same to the decision maker. They've all heard the same things. So you start by making that mindset change, and that begins to separate yourself from others. Now, I forgot what your original point was, but I hope that what I just said in the last 3 minutes makes some sense.
It does actually. It's really, as you were talking, it actually kind of cued me to think about the reality that what the decision maker is, what they're really thinking or what they're really like trying to understand is how you're thinking about their problem. It's less about, do they like Shauna Griffiths or do they like Bob Wiesner because you have an office in these different locations, unless that means that you can better serve them because you have but again, that is flipping it to why it impacts them, right?
Right.
So, but again, this is, you hear me say this a lot to people, and you heard me in a recent conversation we had with a client, is about what you're trying to do in that moment is to show that person that you're pitching to how you're thinking about their problem and how you can solve for that in a unique way, to your point about that differentiation, that the other people who are buying for that same business, they can't think about it in the unique way that you can. So I just want to, kind of put an exclamation on that part.
Sure, and it really leads us into what I think is another important part that we were hoping to cover here today, which is just what is going on in the mind of the
Yeah.
decision makers as they hear you speak, as they read your material, and then ultimately as they huddle around making that final decision for who should be their provider of choice. There's been research that I've been involved in for over 30 years um, that's ongoing. It's not just 30-year-old research, it's
Yeah.
contemporary research, but we've been doing it for a really long time, that attempts to quantify what we might expect an average decision maker to be thinking about in a competitive review situation. So this is not what someone's thinking about when they walk into the deli and want to know which vegetables to put in their salad. This is what someone is thinking about when they've got a matter and they want to choose among 5 law firms that they believe are contenders, or they have an RFP, as you said, that's been sent out to 30 ad agencies, and now they're down to the second, third, and final rounds. What's going on in their heads? How do they think about what's being said to them? So, if I may, I can just quickly run through
Please.
what those quantifiable categories are, and then we can pick them apart in a little more detail if you'd like.
Absolutely.
But there are 4 areas, and those areas are, not surprisingly, how your solution is evaluated. In other words, what your capabilities are, what your experience is, what your team biographies are, what your fee would be. These are all tangible, measurable, observable factors. That's one of 4. Second is a decision maker believing that the competing firm and its representatives, more importantly, truly understand what that decision maker actually wants, not just the objectives as specified in the RFP, but what really matters to them. Have they taken the time to get to know me well enough to know what I care about? And is that reflected in the anticipated work that we're going to get from them and the relationship we're going to have? The third is chemistry. Now, chemistry is, and this runs a little bit counter to what you said earlier, it does have something to do with liking each other.
Mhm.
So if they like Shauna, and who doesn't like Shauna, or Bob, and that's a different
Or Bob.
conversation, then that's going to have an impact. But it actually goes deeper than that. The research says that chemistry is not just getting to like each other, but chemistry is sharing the same values.
Mhm.
It's having cultural compatibility with each other. It's thinking similarly to each other, communicating similarly to each other is part of this chemistry. I have chemistry with somebody who, and this is personal to Bob, who doesn't waste my time,
Mhm.
gets to the point. Whereas somebody else might have chemistry with someone who loves to talk about their dog
Mhm.
and their kids and whatever else. The fourth area, which is sad to say, but all too common, is politics.
Mhm.
Who can be the politically sound choice?
Mhm.
Who can I hire as a decision maker who will make me look good?
Mhm.
So these 4, which interact with each other, they're not 4 completely separate things. There's a lot of overlap, but those are factors that you can predict pretty well are going to enter into a decision maker's mind as they evaluate their options. Now, what
Mhm.
really confounds or throws off competing firms is the relative importance of these 4 things.
Mhm.
How many of our listeners who work in technically oriented or creatively oriented or intellectually oriented firms like advertising, architecture, engineering, law, you'd all like to think that the solution and your expertise, your experience is 90% of the decision. And it might be in any one case for any one decision maker, but the research is pretty clear that the solution is only going to drive between 25 and 30% of the decision.
Mhm.
It might be a tiebreaker,
Mm-hmm.
It might be the price of entry to get into the consideration set, but it's not nearly as important as most firms think it is when they put their pursuits together. The
Mm-hmm.
other things are, roughly 70-75% of the decision. And then you can, for all practical purposes, they're evenly split between they understand me, we have good chemistry, and they're a politically sound choice.
Yeah.
So as pursuit leaders, where do you put your emphasis? Where are you putting your time and your
Mm-hmm.
energy? Are you trying to build the best solution? Or are you trying to get to know the decision makers and really connect with them? And that's something that we have to judge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the way like that laying out of the four factors because it really is to your point, it's not just one of them. It's not just because they like Bob and they like Shauna. It's not just, it's the political decision. Again, it is a combination of those four factors that is really important in how the decision that they make, how they are going to have to go and basically argue for who they want and why they want them.
That's a really great way of putting it too, because use that situation where they have to argue in favor of you. How are they going to defend their choice? How are they going to fall on the sword for you?
Mhm.
That's a function not of solution. That's a function of
Right.
the other stuff. Um,
Mhm.
and by the way, if they feel that you understand them, if they feel good chemistry with you, and if they can justify you politically, then your solution looks better.
Oh, true, yeah.
And you used the term differentiation earlier. Your tangibles, your quantifiables seem more differentiated,
Mhm.
seem more separate from your competitors because you're the ones who reflected that understanding. You're the
Mhm.
ones who generated that chemistry and so on. So it's just so vitally important and so poorly understood
Yeah.
um, by so many firms that compete for new contracts.
Yeah, absolutely. It does. It really becomes like those are your own filters. So many times when you're pitching, you're thinking about what are the filters that I need to put in front of them, or fill out again in this RFP. I have to do these things. But again, even in your own checklist for that's what I'm saying is to have that checklist when you're going in to pitch to people is so critical to setting yourself up for success, as you said, like in that pursuit. And so, I'd really love to get into this next part about like what's the rebalancing that needs to go on in this business development environment, the landscape, and some of these uh, decisions that actually you're making if you're pitching to someone who is the decision maker. How what does that actually end up looking like?
Well, let's take an example of what not rebalancing looks
Yeah.
like. Um, if you're in a business where your focus is on yourself and your focus is on what you say about yourself, um, as well as a business where you might be focusing on the solution, where like in advertising, where you may have to present a recommended campaign or campaign idea, um, then where the energy is placed by the pursuit team is going to be on developing that idea and having the best possible idea and revising ideas over and over again until you are today it's a euphemism, but until you're in the cab or the Uber on your way to the client headquarters and you're still retyping slides and trying to get that solution exactly right. Um, that's the before. That's the unbalanced approach.
Right.
The more balanced or rebalanced approach says I got to have a good solution
Hmm.
because a lousy solution will lose.
Hmm.
But the energy I put into the pursuit has to be equally shared between both developing a solution and getting to know the decision maker.
Hmm.
And what I'd rather see you do in that Uber is be talking about something you just learned about the decision-making process, or something you just learned about an influencer or decision maker, and how can I better reflect that in the pitch that I'm about to give?
Mm-hmm.
I can live with the solution if the solution is on strategy and is decent, and we think it could be effective. But I won't be able to sell it if I've totally missed connecting with the decision makers. On the
Mm-hmm.
other hand, if the solution is a good one, not necessarily a great one, but it's a good one, but I've really, really connected with those people. I've shown how well I understand what they really care about. I've talked to them in their language. I've used their time effectively. I've made us look like a comfortable political choice, if not a desirable political choice. Then they will like the solution just fine. So the rebalancing I want to see clients often do is to put more energy and more effort into understanding the decision makers and reflecting that in their pitch, and maybe not worry so much about having the perfect solution to present.
Right. And that also means that you don't need to have 10 solutions. Again, we were in a conversation recently with a client where the question came up of how many ideas should they take to the client? And again, when they're like, it's saying two things. One is if you have one idea, it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. That also means that you don't need to have 10 ideas. And so it's go with the idea or the ideas, a smaller number than rather than larger, that again show that you understand the client, show the client how you think, how you approach solving the problem. Again, to your point, I love how you said using their language, really trying to sit in their shoes and thinking about the fact that they're going to have to go and fight for you at some point and defend you as their their vendor of choice or their partner. So I just kind of wanted to lean in with that because I think that's a common one that we hear when we're dealing with clients.
I have a simple suggestion for the clients that we work with when it comes to that question, Shauna, and it's just this: don't give them a reason to knock
Oh
you
yeah,
out.
right.
Um, and if you show them 10 solutions, if you show them two solutions, if there's one of them they don't like, then that's the reason to knock you out. If somebody doesn't want to vote for you, if they've already decided that they prefer somebody else or that they're leaning towards somebody else, then that solution that they don't like is the one that they'll hang over you. So I'd rather they don't like me because I didn't have a good insight to share with them. I didn't get to understand their business well enough. Or, maybe we don't align in chemistry, and that's very legitimate. You operate in a way, your culture is such that is incompatible with my culture. And then we shouldn't be working together. That's a good reason to
Oh
lose,
yeah,
right?
right.
But to lose because I brought them four ideas and they didn't like numbers 3 and 4, even though they
Mm-hmm.
might have loved numbers 1 and 2, that's a bad reason to lose.
Yeah.
So, fewer ideas, more connection, more empathy, more get inside their heads is a better play almost all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, as you were saying that, something dawned on me that we actually haven't talked about before, the two of us, is that when you're going down this route of considering those four factors, I think it actually teaches the people who are working on that, because as we know, I've talked about agency world, there are usually more junior people who are involved in the creation of the pitch, that do get that guidance from people who are going to be in that room that day. But I think it's teaching everybody in the entire team, from the more junior person on up. Again, it's a different strategic approach to the people in the room that day. And so I think it also can help them to factor in all of those things rather than, again, I think sometimes if it just comes down to what the idea is, then it can be like, well, the people who came up with the ideas in the deck, they missed. So again, I think it allows everybody up and down the ladder who's been involved, to think about it in a more strategic way. I think it has the whole team operating together in a different way than just, again, it comes down to whoever put the ideas into the deck.
It absolutely does, and it does for an additional reason, which I want to make sure that we add in to this,
Yeah.
which is that it allows the team to take more responsibility
Mm-hmm.
for the process, the product, and the outcome. So
Right.
here's what I mean: if we are putting all our eggs into the solution basket and we lose, and the client maybe tells us, well, your solution didn't resonate with us, or there were better solutions from other firms, which, by the way, it may not necessarily be true,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a whole separate webinar that
Yeah.
we can talk about. Um, what happens in many teams is that the team walks away thinking, well, it's the client's fault. They
Right.
would know a good solution if they've tripped over it on the sidewalk. Um, they're not worthy of working with us because they don't appreciate our solutions. Uh, so we don't learn anything. We don't change anything. We just
Right.
go ahead and we pitch again and just
Mm-hmm.
come up with either the same solution or maybe try to make the solution a little better.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a very convenient excuse that the
Right.
client doesn't appreciate our work or didn't
Mm.
didn't like our solution. On the other hand, as you were saying, if we're really more savvy about what really matters, then we can take more control over things the next time we pitch. We can do a better job of learning about the decision makers.
Mm.
We can ask better questions. We can listen more carefully to the answers. We can interpret the answers more intelligently and connect dots, maybe in a
Mm-hmm.
bit of a different way. Um, and ultimately, those turn into stronger relationships, which are always good to have, and they also lead us eventually to more wins. So
Mm-hmm.
I would like to teach my team when I'm leading a pitch to feel like they have more control over the aspects of the pursuit because they can try to learn more about the decision makers and use that information, and not feel as if, well, it's the client's not worthy because they didn't like our creative work.
Right. Right. It's such a good point. Even it's like thinking of yourself as actually being better set up for success, being in like you're actually set up to lead in the pursuit. I think is and in a more grounded, in a more tangible way. I think than if it just comes down to the solution itself. So it's a really great point.
Yeah, thank you. It's I've lived through so many pitches, Shauna, like you have,
Yeah.
and the pitch team. Here's a very typical scenario. So the pitch team um, is waiting for the solution team to come up with a solution, and when they come up with the solution, then they'll write the pitch.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so all of that happens at the last minute, which means that the pitch is cobbled together, in just 36 minutes, and there's no time to rehearse it. And that's so obvious to the decision makers, and they'll probably not win. But then they go ahead and they do the same thing again because they're waiting for the solution. What I'd rather see a team do is I'd rather see the someone work on the solution, or a team can work on the solution, but there's another team working on the pitch. And if you are doing your homework about how decision making is really done and what really matters to decision makers, you can basically construct the donut
Mm.
content well before the solution is written. Then you can plug the solution into it, maybe make some tweaks to the content, but you'll find that pitch is really coming together a lot earlier than it otherwise would have. It becomes a lot more cohesive than it
Mm.
otherwise would have. And you have more time to be ready to rock and roll. Well, let me rephrase that. You have more time to be ready to rehearse, and then
Right.
you're ready to rock and roll. Um, so you kind of look differently at pitch development when you recognize how important the decision makers um, and their criteria are relative to the solution. And you're actually going to wind up with a stronger pitch.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked about pitching as a general concept. And one of the things that I referenced earlier and promised the listeners that we would get back to is RFPs.
Mm.
So one of the things, you and I talk about RFPs a lot, and you actually would prefer to not be in the RFP situation, try to get ahead of that. Um, just in the way that you're again dealing with your clients, the way that you're staying out ahead of with proactive outreach. And when you are in the position of RFPs, you and I talk a lot about blind spots. So I would love to bring that into the conversation to help address that for the listeners.
Yeah, boy, I hate RFPs. If
Tell us how you
anybody
really
out there
feel
wants
about
to send
them.
us an RFP, you're welcome to.
Yeah.
We'll give it a look. But RFP stands for really effing problematic, um, and there's a reason why they are. That's because they just don't reveal enough. They leave tons and tons of blind spots. And if you follow the RFP to the letter, and let's assume for the moment that it's an RFP you received from somebody that you've not worked with before. They got your name either through a referral or on a list, or through a consultant. So you're going to realize, if you think about it this way, that RFP has not told you nearly enough about the decision makers, about the chemistry. I mean, all these other areas. They're building the RFP just to get a solution.
Yeah.
Those other areas are blind spots for you as the competing firm. You're not going to find out what really matters. You're not going to be able to address it if you stick just to the RFP. And the RFP ultimately might even be misleading, because the decisions are not going to be made based on solely your alignment with the RFP. It's still going to be made based on understanding me, based on chemistry, and based on politics. It's just that the RFP is not telling you that. There's another side of the same coin, which is the blind spots about you, the competing firm, that the RFP doesn't allow you to reveal. You have capabilities, you have personality, you have culture, you have vision, you have um, uh, relationships that you're not really able to put into play because you have to follow the RFP. Um, Again, the advertising world is really interesting this way, because any of us that have been in the business for any length of time, and I think we could say the same thing about law and audit and architecture and so on, relationships are so important. They just matter so much for so many different reasons. Yet pursuing business through an RFP almost prevents you from developing relationships. You have to submit a proposal that covers these areas and it's no more than these many pages. You're given one phone call
Yeah.
that's only going to be 60 minutes long, and it's going to be just with these people. The pitch has to be 45 minutes with 15 minutes for Q&A. It's all stuff that never happens in the real world. If I win that piece of business, we're going to do it completely different. But RFPs just create this artificial um, process that allows these blind spots on both sides.
Mm.
I have blind spots about the prospect has blind spots about me. How do we still realize that this is going to be a really good relationship, and how do we win the business and then keep the business if we are fortunate enough to win it when all these blind spots exist? So RFPs, really effing problems. They just don't create the environment for a successful decision and a successful relationship.
Right. And they're part of the reality. So on one hand, as we said recently, sometimes you might say, well, if it's an RFP and I'm going to be that blinded by it, then that might not be the piece of business that I want to go after. So again, that's why there's tons of steps that you can take to try to get ahead of it. But at the same time, there are going to be moments when our listeners are facing, well, I have to submit this RFP. I have to, answer this way. So in all the experience that you've had, what are some of the tips that you can share with the audience around, how do you actually try to do that in a way where you can improve your odds of winning if you do have to respond to an RFP?
There are different levels of solution or reaction to it, depending on how risky you want to be or how determined you want to be to win. Let's put it a different way. At the extreme level, you get an RFP from a client you really want to work with, but that RFP is going to be too restrictive for you to actually get to know them and for them to get to know you. Call them up or send them an email and say, we would love to work with you. We think we're really well equipped to solve your problems. this RFP is not going to give you a chance to get to know us, and it's certainly not giving us a chance to get to know you. Can we just talk?
Mm.
Can we just chat?
Yeah.
And you might get 10% of the time, somebody might say, sure, that's a really smart idea. The other 90%, they'll probably say, well, if you don't want to answer the RFP, then don't answer. Then
Yeah.
you're not involved. But I would start by at least asking the question, is that
Mhm.
okay? Now, assuming you cannot get that meeting going or that conversation going, but you still feel like you have to pursue, then you have a couple of options going for you. You can still try to break the rules a little bit. If they've limited the amount of contact that you can have with them, for example, you might just say, look, we'd love to learn more about you. Could we have an additional call? Or we
Mhm.
have a few other questions. Would you be willing to answer them? Even put them in an email and see if they'll send you. So try to bend the rules a little bit to your favor. If they won't do that, but you're still staying in the pitch, and you can understand that I'm kind of leaning towards if a lot of these ifs would indicate
Ifs.
you should not be in the pitch at all.
Right.
But if you're still going to stay in it, then think about other sources you have for information.
Mhm.
Reach out to your network. Who knows these people? Who has been involved with them before? Who's worked with them before? What can you tell me about these people? Not just the company or the brand, but the decision makers. Look at adjacencies as well. So, for example, I was working with an architectural design firm that was going to be putting up a library in somewhere in Virginia, and they didn't have a lot of access to decision makers in the university. So we had them call the local politicians and upscale business people in that same city who we felt probably knew these decision makers, and tell us a little bit about them. Now you have to. We're not looking for dirt on
Yeah.
them. This isn't a
Right.
political campaign, but what's important to the community? What would be important to these decision makers? What have they gravitated towards in the past or gravitated away from in the past? You'll get some very helpful answers from that. So be expansive and creative in looking for sources of info about decision makers. Now, a lot of RFPs, some of our listeners are going to say, don't even give us the time to do that, or they might restrict us from doing that research. Either do the best you can, run the risk that you do the research and maybe they get pissed off at it, but maybe you'll still be able to find out a couple things that you otherwise wouldn't. So try to bend the rules, try to expand your network, try to get some more information from somewhat more creative sources, and you still might be able to do enough to have a what do they call it, a puncher's chance
Yeah, yeah.
in that RFP.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all you've shared today. And, folks who are listening, who are watching, we really hope that now you're starting to see what we mean when we say how decision makers really think. And, again, that's an extra layer that you're going to in the preparation for the pitch. And I love how, again, Bob, we talked about even how the team is working different together when you're asking yourself that vital question of how do these decision makers really think that you're getting in front of them. So again, thanks everybody so much for joining us today. Please stay tuned for our next episode, which I'm going to give you a sneak peek to, which is going to be the 13 truths of pitching. You don't want to miss that one. That one's coming up. So if you do use these tips, if you have feedback for us, please drop those in the comments. And we also invite you to reach out to us and connect with us on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, Bob. I appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, Shauna. Fun as always.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody, have an amazing day.